Hi there, my name's Ben West and I'm your communications and branding guy. Now, when lots of people think of climate change, they think of guys with flowers in their hair hugging trees. My job as the communications and branding guy is to try and move away from that stereotype to perhaps something a little bit more constructive. I'm 20 years old, I'm here in beautiful Oxford, as you can see, and at the moment it's myself and a great guy called Craig, who's in charge of supporter relations, taking care of all the UKYCC supporters in the big wide world. And there's also Mark, who's in charge of making sure that everything is visually stunning. Now, the three of us together can't get the communication side of things done just by ourselves. Our job is to work with you and the rest of the guys across the UKYCC team to make sure that UKYCC is communicating what it's all about, what the things that make it unique in the right kind of ways, working out ways in which we can pitch climate change and change the language that we use to talk about climate change in order to reach new kinds of audiences. And then we've also got the additional task of working out ways of building up our base of supporters and getting them active and building up an ongoing relationship with them so that they feel part of the UKYCC and it feels less like a one-sided organisation taking charge of things and more like we're all part of the same national, global, exciting movement. So as per a cheap and nasty educational video from the 1980s, I'm going to be emerging from various scenic shots to talk to you about various different aspects of communication. Now the first one I want to talk about is framing. Now we've mentioned that already, but I think it's an important one because it goes to the core of exactly what it is we're doing as part of the communications team. Now, when you think of a word, for example, or a phrase such as cheap flights, it brings with it a certain set of connotations. For example, cheap flights suggests that they are actually cheap. It suggests that by being against cheap flights, for example, we're actually in favour of more expensive flights. Then, if you follow the logic from there, poor people perhaps prefer cheap flights. And so by being against cheap flights, we're against poor people and in favour of more expensive flights by more expensive people. And so we lose the argument. What we can do in order to avoid that pitfall and to avoid using the language which is stacked against us is to perhaps reframe the whole debate and start talking, for example, about hidden cost flights. One of the reasons why we're against these so-called cheap flights is because although the price might look attractive in the adverts, the cost for the environment is absolutely huge and it's hidden. And people are actually quite used to hearing about hidden cost flights. For example, when I book a flight that's maybe £10, I'll pay £10 extra for extra baggage, or a fiver for food on board the airplane, or another 50 quid in taxes. And so cheap flights aren't really cheap at all, the message needs to be. They've got all these massive hidden costs, but at least most importantly, they've got all these hidden costs for the environment. So the price that you pay in terms of cash doesn't really reflect the true cost of the flight. Because by talking about hidden cost flights rather than cheap flights, we can refocus the argument in terms where we can win it, rather than in terms that are rigged against us and in favour of the airlines. One last example is carbon capture and storage technology, or sexily called CCS technology on coal power stations, which is what the government wants to build. The idea being that by building these dirty coal power stations, we can somehow capture all the carbon and everything will be alright. Now, instead of talking about sexy sounding CCS technology, we can turn around and say, this is basically the same old stuff. It's Victorian technology. The government's answer, the solution to the issue of climate change, is to build more of this dirty, polluting Victorian technology. By talking about Victorian technology rather than something that sounds sexy and futuristic, we can bring to mind all these ideas about, little boys up chimneys and guys with top hats and all the bad old days of Victorian times. Basically, say that those who are in favour of these new coal power stations are in favour of taking us back rather than forward. Earlier on in the video, I talked about the three main things that the communication team is doing. One of the things which we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks in order to perhaps show what we can do and to maybe get some ideas out there about what we might be doing in the future is we're going to do basically a sort of an online marketing campaign called Get Some Vision. Now what we're going to do is that we're going to send a really cool email actually to everyone on our mailing list called Get Some Vision. Basically the argument is that although the government's done a few good things on climate change, such as the climate bill, what we haven't seen yet from the government is some kind of joined up, exciting, ambitious strategy for how we can take Britain forward into this exciting, sexy, green new future that we really, really need at the moment. So the idea is that because Gordon Brown hasn't shown us any vision yet, we need to call on him to do that by asking people to pitch in maybe £5 here or there in order so we can buy him some glasses and take the message to Downing Street with a pair of glasses and the names of everyone who donated. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to send out this email and we're going to ask people to donate a fiver. And with that fiver, we'll buy the glasses, take it to Downing Street. But it's a good opportunity to get people feeling like they're involved in the UKYCC, that they've contributed to what we're doing. And it's also a good way for us to raise money in a way that doesn't restrict us in the same way that having grants would do. So we're a genuinely grassroots funded youth movement. It gives us the opportunity to build up our newsletter list and build up the base of supporters at the same time, so you hit 2 or 3 birds with one stone there. So in terms of what we can do for you, I mean, we can help you with advice and stuff about how to target various groups of supporters. We can provide you with design advice and toolkits about how you can make everything look UKYCC'd up and on brand and on really looking quite cool. Mark can help you with that, does a really good job at it. And we can work with you to help the kind of the language that you use and the writing that you produce talks about climate change in a way that's appropriate for who you're talking to. So if you need any advice or help with that, then just come to us. We can do that for you. And so that's probably enough of me talking for one day. And so I'm just going to end with just 5 points just for you to keep in mind, and hopefully kind of send you off in the right direction. The first thing to remember is that what we're doing with UKYCC, it isn't alternative, it isn't radical, it isn't off the wall. What we're doing is basically common sense, and that needs to be reflected in all of our messages. Combating climate change isn't some crazy thing, it's common sense. It's all about protecting your homes and families and things that matter to you. The second thing we really need to be focusing on is talking about a vision for a better future, positive solutions. Rather than telling people, don't do this, don't do that, stop this, don't build this, we need to be saying, this is our positive vision, this is what a green future looks like, and this is what we want to work with you to get the government to do. We want the government to increase high-speed rail, we want the government to make public transport more affordable, we want government to increase renewable energy. So instead of saying, don't do this, don't do that, stop for a second and think, well, instead of saying, don't do this, think about what we can tell people to do. Remember, Martin Luther King didn't stand up on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and say, stop discrimination. He had a dream for a better America. Same goes for Barack Obama, obviously. Okay, so the third thing is to keep in mind is that climate change these days has moved on to a stage where it's no longer just an environmental issue. It's a historical issue and it's a political issue as well. We're at a stage in history where society really has to decide what kind of world we want to live in and what kind of world we want our kids to grow up in. That's what this issue is about. It's not about whether you care about the trees, it's not about whether you care about the polar bears. It's about the kind of future we want to live in, and even the kind of present we want to live in, because the effects are starting to hit. And finally, the fourth, or is it the fifth? Anyway, the final thing we need, I think it'd be really helpful for us to start thinking about, is that we're not just part of an environmental movement here, because the environmental movement by itself isn't going to get things done on this issue. We can't achieve the change we need just with the existing environmental movement, just with the same old suspects, same old people. We're a climate change movement, not just an environmental movement, and that means involving all kinds of people from all kinds of political persuasions, viewpoints, and all the rest of it. We need to focus on getting a mass movement that represents the majority of people in this country. And if I can help you at all with that, then please really get in touch, and keep up the great work, everyone, because we're getting into some amazing places with UKYCC. Thanks.